Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mansoura Modares. I am the Senior Consultant at Center for Race and Culture, and I am happy to be presenting this um, roundtable session to you today, which is a hybrid session. So we have participants in person with us today as well as online joining us. And in our roundtable today, we will be discussing Black History Month and the role of nonprofits in addressing discrimination in our community. Before we get started, I would like to do our land acknowledgement at Center for Race and Culture. We're gathered here on the traditional Treaty 6 territory of First Nations and the Métis Nation of Alberta Zone 4. We respectfully acknowledge and thank the diverse Indigenous peoples whose ancestors' footsteps have marked this land for centuries, including the Cree, Nehio, Dene, Saulteaux, Nakota, Blackfoot, as well as the Métis and the Inuit. This land is and has been a welcoming place for all peoples who come to Edmonton and call it home. It is a place built for community, trade, friendship, and shared understanding. We recognize those Indigenous peoples who are still fighting for equality today, and we support them in the spirit of decolonization and reconciliation. We remain committed to honoring the struggles of our Indigenous siblings and joining with them to end injustice. Together, we call upon all of our collective honored traditions and ancestors to help us work together in the spirit of community and understanding today and onwards. So a few points about Center for Race and Culture. Since its establishment in 1993, the Center for Race and Culture, or CFRAC, formerly known as Northern Alberta Alliance on Race Relations, has brought together diverse people with an interest in promoting and supporting individual, collective, and systemic change to address discrimination and racism and to encourage intercultural understanding. Taking an intersectional approach, our expertise spans workplace development, community building, research, and education. Also, a few notes about Africa Center. This is the Council for Advancement of African Canadians in Alberta and has been operating as Africa Center since its incorporation in 2006. The Africa Center is the largest Pan-African nonprofit organization in Western Canada, serving as a community hub that provides programming and services from a place of cultural awareness and competency to the families in our diverse community. Now I would like to introduce our panelists. First, we have Nneka Otogbolu. Nneka is the Director of Communications and Equity Strategy at Edmonton Community Foundation. In addition to the strategic leadership of the Foundation's equity efforts, Nneka works to enhance the Foundation's ability to connect with equity-seeking organizations and charities working with Edmonton's several marginalized communities. She collaborates with diverse groups of local nonprofits in Edmonton, fostering a culture of equity and reconciliation. On the communications side, her presence increases Edmonton Community Foundation's ability to connect with diverse people interested in philanthropy, justice, and community service. She's led several teams across different industry sectors. She is also a co-recipient of the Canadian Bureau of International Education's Elizabeth Patterson Award for Internationalization for her work in her community on Vancouver Island. She loves to read, watch movies, and cook. Our next panelist, Dr. Miriam Sakandi. Dr. Miriam Sekandi was born and raised in Uganda, Africa. She came to Canada as an international student in 2004 to pursue graduate studies at the University of Alberta. She holds an MA in Textiles and Clothing and a PhD in Secondary Education from the University of Alberta. Dr. Miriam Sekande is a mother of four and grandma of one. She is a lecturer at the University of Alberta in the Secondary Education Teacher Education Program. She also volunteers with various organizations in Edmonton, including as board chair of the Alberta Black Therapists Network and National Black Coalition of Canada. She is a passionate educator and renowned keynote speaker and has given over 40 keynote addresses, particularly on topics around diversity, equity and inclusion, racial trauma and mental health, and intercultural parenting. She is also an international best-selling author of the book It Takes a Village to Wreck a Child. Next, we have Ese Ejebe, who is the Director of Anti-Racism at End Poverty Edmonton. She has over 20 years of experience holding management and leadership positions in the nonprofit sector. Ese is a seasoned thought leader passionate about equitable opportunity for all. She works closely with local communities to create innovative solutions and programs that center the voice of equity-deserving individuals and groups. She is particularly interested in community-driven initiatives that involve individuals in systemic change. Ese holds 2 Bachelor of Arts degrees in Sociology and Social Work, as well as a Master of Social Work degree from the University of Victoria. In her free time, Ese enjoys family time and gardening. Next, we have Rachelle Ignacio. Rachelle leads Tamarac's work on equity, diversity, and inclusion. She's passionate about community building, volunteerism, and advocating for underrepresented individuals and communities in her role. She works with the Tamarack team, board, and network to transform Tamarack into an organization committed to anti-racism. She will also support our members and learners in their journeys to create equitable results at community-wide scales. Prior to joining Tamarack, Rachelle was the anti-racism equity specialist at the City of Edmonton, where she supported the organization into their anti-racism journey, in addition to supporting the race and ethnicity at the City Employee Resource Network. Prior to taking on the anti-racism portfolio, she worked with Edmonton Fire Rescue Services in beginning their diversity and inclusion journey. Rachelle completed a Bachelor of Science in Human Ecology from the University of Alberta with a minor in Community Diversity. Rachelle is a founder of Black-owned Market Edmonton, sits on Edmonton Police Service's Black Community Communication Council, and is a board member of Edmonton Culture. She is a recipient of Edify Magazine's Top 40 Under 40, Diversity Magazine's Community Leader of the Year, and named as one of the Canadian International Black Women Excellence's Top 100 Black Women to Watch. And last but not least, we have Barhet Woldemariam, who is our very own new executive director at Center for Race and Culture. Barhet's previous work includes working with HIV Edmonton as their director of program, and at the Canadian Red Cross with a safety and well-being team supporting the recovery operation after the wildfires in Fort McMurray in BC. She brings experience from both the business world, working with TD Canada Trust, and community organizations. Her roles have allowed her to work closely with community partners to help address the needs of individuals, family, and the community. Her academic background in sociocultural anthropology, along with her personal experience in community work, provides her with the acumen to deeply understand the importance of equity and advocacy. I would like to welcome all our panelists, and the floor is all yours, Farhat.
So we've heard about your backgrounds and your bios, but I wondered if each panelist could take a moment to share about their work within their respective organizations around anti-racism work and what that's looked like. Just briefly overview, and then we'll dive into some of the questions. And popcorn style is fine, or you can go in order, whatever you prefer.
I can kick off. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I want to acknowledge that I'm here in Treaty 6 territory, and I was also born in Treaty 6, Rocky Mountain House, small town. When I think about the anti-racism work, so at Tamarack Institute, I joined in September of last year, so I'm still relatively new. And they are an organization who want to have an impact in transforming systems at the local level. I'm the only person on my team full-time that works in equity, diversity, and inclusion. We do try and embed it so that everybody has a responsibility for anti-racism work, for thinking about reconciliation, for thinking about how they're centering equity within their day-to-day, whether they're in finance, whether they're doing coaching and consulting. I would say that we're really at the beginning of our journey. And so that's something that I've put out there publicly, is that we strive to become an anti-racist organization, but we're not claiming that we're an anti-racist organization yet, because we do have some work to do. And I think it's really important that when we're a settler-led organization, especially acknowledging where we are at in our journey and sharing what that process is like with other people.
Okay, I'll go next. Hi, everyone. My name is Nneka Otobolu. Thanks for having me here. I work for the Edmonton Community Foundation, and my journey with ECF started in March 2020, a week before the shutdown to the pandemic. Before my role there, I had also led a local charity on the Vancouver Island called the Nanaimo Science and Sustainability Society, NSP. ECF had started its equity journey in 2017. And first of all, being a funder in the city, it was started by carrying out an equity audit of the grants department to see how well we were serving equity deserving communities here and how we could do it better. And an outcome of that audit was our equity statement, and part of it as well, a recommendation was to get a senior role that will lead the equity drive for the organization. Initially, my role was just to be the director of communications, and then that was tweaked a bit, and I currently wear two hats. The equity work is never finished. The space is so dynamic, and we learn every day. Last year, I sat on the Vital Signs Committee as a co-chair, and our topic was systemic racism in Edmonton. That was a very deep topic, and it was just an opportunity for me to learn more. And like I said, it's just an ongoing process. We're not there yet. Do we hold ourselves accountable? Yes, we do. We do report yearly on our progress, and it's also on our website as well, hoping to get feedback from community to point us into the right direction, because we can't do it alone. We are depending on support from the community to get this job done and done well.
I'll go next because I don't want to go after you. I feel very honored to be a part of the panel, so thank you for inviting me. Listening to the bios of this very powerful women leaders is very inspiring. So I work with End Poverty Edmonton, and I've been in that position as director of anti-racism for the last 3 months. So I'm fairly new in the position.
but End Poverty Edmonton is was a secretariat that was started by the city of Edmonton. But right now we're currently a non-for-profit. So we're not a service provider. We engage in systems work. So we're working with policy and systems change to make sure that we don't have to keep putting out fires. So with the work of poverty, we've divided our organizations into different game changer themes. So focusing on the root cause of poverty. So racism is seen as a root cause of poverty because we know from research and data that a lot of racialized people experience higher rates of poverty. And so, and a lot of that is tied to inequitable opportunities and discrimination and racism experienced in their life. So that's why anti-racism is a game changer, a focus point for End Poverty Edmonton. And I'm very excited to be in this position because it's looking at systems, right? It's bringing people together and connecting the dots that normally will not connect. So convening people, you know, like seeing what people don't have time to do within nonprofits, for example, there's always like lack of time because you're meeting immediate needs to think and strategize. So End Poverty is able to do that. We are guided by a stewardship table that's made up of City of Edmonton workers and city councilors and community members. And so we're very much connected to the process of if we wanted change, we're able to get there quickly. So there's a lot of opportunity for the organization to make real and concrete change in Edmonton. And I'm happy now that anti-racism, which has always been mentioned as a root cause of poverty, but now there's a position, my position, there to help move the work forward. So I'm excited to see where this conversation goes today, and also to get ideas from you, the participants, and also see how collaboration can happen with the people on the panel here today.
How do I follow these amazing ladies? So for me, my work with anti-racism started in the community. When I came here in 2004, I lived in a student residence for 400 families, most of which were international students. If any of you are familiar with Michener Park, it's now gone, it's been taken down. It was family residence for the University of Alberta. So not like in single students, so it was families. And in that community, I didn't even know about the race thing until I came here. I think all of us, right? It was never a thing. Till we came here and then it's like, oh my goodness, you know, this color and it really bothers people. I didn't realize that until I came here. And so living in Michener Park is where all this work was birthed, because I started recognizing how just by looking different was affecting individuals. And I started my leadership work in there as well as a resident assistant. So, and then later on a senior resident assistant running the thing, and as well as a student. And then of course, I took up any opportunity at the university to sit on committees and boards to bring awareness to this. And I didn't have, I didn't have guidance, and this is 2004, it looks like far or near, but this conversation was not being had. NAR was one of the places that I actually volunteered with at that time. So most of my work in the community with anti-racism has been through volunteering with organizations, and lately becoming today I was thinking about, I always think of an object that I use to represent myself. And I was seeing myself as a megaphone, because people are so afraid of having these conversations we tend to have them with each other, but when we go out there, we don't want to have them. It's easy to have them with each other. But so I see myself now more as a megaphone to amplify the voices of the people. And for me, every conversation matters. Every conversation on the street, at an event, anything you tell me, if there is any form of racism in that conversation, I take it out. I may not tell you, and your name doesn't get mentioned, but I know it matters, and I do bring it forward in the different forums that I find myself in. So.
And maybe just building on that, and I just want to say the panelists have said that they're okay with questions coming
Yes.
throughout. It doesn't need to wait till the end. So if something sparks, just please make it known that and just jump in. We really want it to be more of a discussion and not just a one-way dialogue. But one of the first questions, given that a lot of us represent community-based organizations, what do you believe is the role of community-based organizations, both the institution and the individuals within them, in raising awareness and in working together to address racism?
I feel like community organizations play a very crucial role. And to be fair, like they seem to have carried a lot of that work of anti-racism. And it seems like the systems are just recently playing catch up. It seems that way anyways, because nonprofit organizations have always had focus on serving like the most vulnerable or marginalized populations. And so they are already like doing the work and advocating and putting up fires, but yeah, there's only so much you can do if you're not the person making policy and making decisions in that regard. So I feel like the systems are playing catch up to that now, and community organizations can continue to tell the stories of the communities that they're serving. I think that's like a crucial role that they could play because they're most connected to the community. And so continuing to share that story in a way that is not, in a way that is meaningful for the community itself. So like not over consulting the community, but just sharing the stories to, you know, systems and people who are disconnected that might not be able to hear firsthand what the issues are that people are experiencing. So sharing stories, I feel, is a crucial role that community organizations can continue to play.
I'll build off what you're saying. So I think when you look at community organizations and nonprofits, we really need to take that inward look at what we're doing, because we're working within a system of supremacy and oppression, and we're tied to like granting and funding dollars. And so what's our role in saying we need trust-based philanthropy that doesn't have all these strings attached, that doesn't take all this time and effort, or communities who don't have that capacity, they don't have that knowledge and understanding of how to even put a lengthy grant application through. So I think the role of community organizations is not only serving the people, but also being that advocate to help transform the systems, to help ask for that change. And sometimes that might be saying, like, this doesn't align, this doesn't fit within our values, and so I can't accept this funding, or I can't accept this support, and being that voice. And I think it's really challenging when you're always fighting for the same amount of money, the little pool of resources that are out there. But if community organizations continue to operate within the system, then what change do we have?
Beautiful. What Rochelle has mentioned, I could come from the position of the funders, because Edmonton Community Foundation is also a community organization, and we also have plenty of community foundations or community organizations in Edmonton that are also funders. I agree with Rochelle and Essay on the awareness, creation, and understanding when it comes to what the needs of these nonprofits are to better support the community, especially as regards discrimination. Something else I want to put in there is education. For funders, especially in the space, regardless of where you're actually working or what sector you find yourself, the burden should be on us as funders or as community groups to educate ourselves about the issues. For example, when we do get requests from community groups and that we're reviewing them internally, we see a lot of time is put into explaining what the issues are than what the ask is about. So this is not me speaking or tooting our horn of the work we do at the CF, but we try and strive to educate ourselves on what the issues are. And our feedback to the community group is normally, please don't waste so much time telling us what the issues are. We already know. Tell us what your project or program or initiative would do to help that issue or alleviate the issue in your community. We see that a lot of people don't know this, and so we try and strive to educate ourselves. Education is key. Most of us have nonprofits that we don't understand the power we hold in not just amplifying voices or connecting people, but also educating the community we are in to say things the way they are. Sometimes some of the topics can be tough, it can be uncomfortable, but we can educate and create safe spaces for each other to share what our learnings are across sectors.
Can I, before you jump in, I just want to say, so I also work in community through like Black-owned Market and some other social enterprises. And last year, NECA invited me to the Edmonton Community Foundation annual general meeting. And there was so few Black people in that room that I understood the value of that invitation. And I also understood the importance of being in that room and going outside my comfort zone and talking to people and telling them what my story was. So I think that there's like different roles that each of us all probably play in, not only as people that are in leading or working with the field of anti-racism, but also how we show up within our own personal lives and our own spheres of influence.
Thank you, ladies. You've almost had all my points. So my thought with community organizations is the need to talk to each other. There is a lot of, we tend to say the same things, and you probably see that when those requests for funding come in, we are all saying the same thing. We are all clamoring for the same pot of money. But it's almost, we need to think about how we can collaborate versus compete. And I think that's a huge, huge piece of looking at. So when we look at funding, for example, you look at funding, you look at your organization, and you see that you have to pretzel yourself to fit the proposal. You know, you kind of have to like twist things around. And all you could have done is actually reach out to another organization and say, hey, you guys do close to this work and we do this work. If we came together, we could actually build a good program that we could give the people. Versus trying to work in our, well, what is going to end up happening is every person will have their own little organization and we are all competing for the same money. But I think we do have that opportunity to find those opportunities of collaboration and versus competition.
Mm-hmm. So I can build up on what my two sisters have said. I remember very well, Michelle, what I told you for the annual meeting. It was, and I agree. I think we were both in Kwakweda, or we.
There's one other.
One other person,
Yeah.
Black people in that room, and basically, sadly, that's what philanthropy looks like, right? But we are hoping things change, and the change has to come from us. And like my sister said, we have to come out from our comfort zones, pull ourselves out, and engage. There are lots of initiatives coming up, and the question is, how prepared are we to leverage on those initiatives coming up? And so the question of capacity comes in. We've seen that a lot of nonprofits are either run from basements of people's homes, or a laptop in a coffee shop, or still in the mental phase where people are thinking of planning and scoping work they can do. Some are just barely striving. So when you look at their balance sheet, you would see that everything they get in, every penny they get in goes out where they hardly even pay their staff properly. And so that issue or that the idea of collaboration comes in. Who else is doing this work in our own space? Sometimes I actually did think about that, like replication of services, but also along the line, I've come to see that people that have, for example, I would use the food safety. During the pandemic, a lot of nonprofits had to step into this food safety space because the people they serve were hungry. But that was not their core mandate or objective or work to do. And right after the pandemic, when it came to the recovery stage, we had the economic downturn, inflation started, so they had to remain in the food safety space. So what happens if they decide tomorrow not to replicate that service because another nonprofit is doing something similar and they stop? The moment they stop, the gap will be created. Who fills that gap? So these are questions that we ask that really don't have answers to because they are complex issues. But what we know about complex issues is that they would require innovative and creative approaches to solve. So that's where my sister ethic comes in. When we're looking up to end poverty to be like that convener of sorts, to bring everyone to the table to say, hey, we have this issue, how do we collaborate to solve that? So I think my comment has left more questions than answers.
No, there was another point, Miriam, that you made about competing against one another. And today I was in this, it was like a bankability in Black communities webinar that Sensi put on. And Victor put it really quite well because there was the endowment fund for Black Canadians that the Foundation for Black Canadians was the recipient of. And they said that the whole process felt tribal. And he commended like Africa Center, he commended Foundation for Black Communities. There's a few other organizations that put their names in for that funding. So while he's saying there's great organizations doing this work, but why is it that the government is creating a system where we have to compete with one another? So I really loved how you brought up the point about that we need to collaborate and even like think about the systems that we are navigating in within that are making us compete.
Hi, my name is Yuhua, and I just wanted to kind of add a question about that as well, just because I really would love to hear the panel's thoughts on like what that connection building looks like, the tools, and what that looks like with like an intercultural lens. And I think the reason why I asked is because like I'm a Chinese descendant and I work a lot with the Chinese community, especially in the Chinatown area. And in the last couple of years, what I've seen a lot in community spaces and nonprofit spaces is when we engage with institutions, sometimes there's an active role in which these institutions like governments will actually kind of, whether intentionally or not, take advantage of the competition between different communities for resources, for voices, and use that as a way to maybe, you know, appear as if there's a lot of work being done, but then take a step of inaction because they're saying, well, you know, these people want this and it's in contrary with like what your community is speaking of. And I find that to be something so interesting because when we talk a lot more about it, it seems like a lot of communities are fighting for the same thing. It's about survival, it's about resources, but because there's that lack of communication and maybe that lack of solidarity, sometimes like an institution like the city can be like, well, we don't know what to do now because everyone's saying different things. And there is a cultural there's a cultural wall sometimes between different communities. So I would love to hear if there's any thoughts about like how to build that intercultural connection as well.
Yeah, I think like having like organizations like Center for Race and Culture, for example, is a really good thing. So like wherever we can like advocate for like resources to be put in organizations like this is good, because I feel like the starting point anyways, in my opinion, is education. Like if we educate ourselves to understand things like oppression and then internalized oppression, to understand that it's not about like we didn't create the system, right? We're put in a system whereby it's an oppressive one, and this is the results that we're getting, it's competition. So like when we look at things from that anti-oppressive lens, I feel it's a really good starting point. So like education about that. And so like if like, you know, Center for Race and Culture is doing like, you know, anti-racism or anti-oppression type of training to the community so that we have the language, we have the understanding, we understand the history of where this is coming from, how the systems were created in the first place, then it will help us move that conversation forward to know that, okay, we're all in this together, right? Like we don't have to compete amongst ourselves for the same resources. I feel like that's a starting point, but curious to hear.
Yeah. And I don't know how this message gets out, but there is a misconception that starting a nonprofit is profitable. People treat it like a business, right? So they start one to make money, but a nonprofit is a service. So somebody recognizes that there is a shortcoming somewhere and they want to fill that gap. But then there is no research done to find out who else is doing this work. Somebody gets excited about an idea, talks to a friend, talks to his husband, wife. The next thing, they're registering, which is fine. But actually doing research work, if people come to you and they're talking about an organization, they want to start this and that, ask them to do the research. See who else is out there and what are they doing? How could you contribute towards them? Also, I would recommend like bigger organization like Center for Race and Culture has been around a long time. And I was talking to someone else from another large organization, and they said at this point, someone needs to rein things in. Someone needs to rein things in and say, hey, you, and you. We are all doing the same work. We do have the ability together to actually apply for bigger funding and have a bigger impact versus everyone getting like $2,000, which, right? But if because organizations in like the eastern part of Canada are doing that, they come up together, they get this big funding, and then they are able to do the grassroots work. But it's going to be hard for us to do that grassroots work when we are fractured, but we have the, I call them motherships. We have motherships, right? That could help with reining in some of the smaller organizations. And it's not that stop doing the work you're doing, but hey, if you have a project, Center for Race and Culture has a project, and someone else is running a project on the ground, they could secure the funding and ask the other organization to implement, and then they oversee. I don't know whether that helps. Yeah.
So I could, right on your comments, we do actually have something similar that we're currently running with Africa Center. For nonprofits. So as a community foundation, we can't fund nonprofits, but we fund charities. So a couple of years ago, we had a meeting with Africa Center to find creative ways we could support Black nonprofits that did not have charitable status. And we had also seen a lot of replication of services. And so when a group meets us, we refer them back to Africa Center and say you could have a conversation with Africa Center to find ways to collaborate on the project. And in that way, Africa Center buys into the project and reaches out to us for funding. So the funding goes to Africa Center and the nonprofit gets support where they are running the program. So the program is able to function, but under Africa Center. And I guess with that, it actually really did solidify the role of Africa Center in Edmonton for Black communities. And we're hoping to see that replicated across Alberta. So that said, something else I would also want to say is that some of this non-profit or grassroots organizations are actually ethnocultural and they have community leaders. It would be great to see all the community leaders on a table, breaking bread, talking and building trust. Trust is really one of the issues or obstacles or barriers to community groups, grassroots organizations and non-profits from collaborating. we don't trust each other, or we don't trust each other enough to share ideas or even ask questions about what we could do better. But if the moment we decide to tread that path and start building trust across, we'll see more deeper and more meaningful collaborations happening across the sector.
There's also one question from our online participants. So Megan asks, what would it look like for government to support community organizations to build opportunities for collaboration rather than competition? Would this be supporting communities of practice, for instance? How would funding delivery need to change?
So at Tamarack, we received a 5-year grant in our Communities Building Youth Futures program. And what we do is we kind of act as, in some roles, a convener, in some roles, coaches and consultants, and then in some ways that backbone organization. So your mothership that you referred to, but providing a table where there is an organization who has the administration capacity, who has like that institutional knowledge that they can support community to do those smaller projects. And part of that funding was actually to grant out into community. They did I believe in September, they had reconciliation funding, and all you had to do was come with a project. And then you could get, I think, up to $5,000 to carry out your work. And so I think that the government needs to look at how can we be more flexible so that your funding doesn't have a specific line item that's attached to it, but this is the output that they're hoping to get, and let people at the local level who can understand and address local unique needs and challenges, that understand what racism looks like here in Alberta versus what racism looks like in Halifax versus Toronto. Like, it's all very different because we all have different experiences, we all have different histories. And so I think the government just needs to start relinquishing some of that control and putting it back in the hands of community, or at least organizations and leaders within the community who can help ensure that, you know, there's checks and balances that do need to occur, but what does it look like when you allow that innovation, that creativity, that collaboration to also occur?
Yeah, and I guess I could add to that, like if government funders, for example, are more intentional about who they are providing funding to, so they can ensure that people have, like, in their mandate, like have like anti-oppressive or anti-racist policies. They can make sure that the board is representative of like the people that is being served by the organization. They're prioritizing equity and diversity and inclusion, right? And a lot of like the grassroots organizations are doing that, but some of the bigger organizations that have like the bigger pool or pocket of funding might not have the systems or policies in place. So that's a good way to, like, you know, to like sort of level the playing field for community organizations, because like I said, in the nonprofit sector, like a lot of anti-racism type of work has happened and or is happening. And so like that could be a way of recognizing the efforts as well.
Maybe if I could just add to, just on a policy level to what Essay was saying, there's an umbrella organization in Manitoba, they spoke at a conference yesterday, and they put it right into their policy. Your board must represent the community that you serve, this percentage, right? So that's the beginning. It's not just the only thing, but also that you can't become a member unless you've done equity training, that, so there are a few stipulations or things like built in. There's a colleague I met a few years ago who came from another part of the world and said, how is it legal to get funding if your board doesn't represent the communities that you serve? And so you can actually put those things into place to make sure people are doing the work that they need to represent the communities that they serve.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I forgot to mention multi-year funding is something the government needs to look at. So instead of competing against one another, and instead of doing this year after year, let's look at those 5-10-year grants so that we could look at big scale projects and actually implement them and not worrying about your next funding cycle and how you can continue that work.
And that which you just said is gonna require coming together, because it's going to be a big project. It's going to make a difference and it gives you time. But you know, you can't have a project that runs for 6 months. How do you even measure impact? in 6 months, right? Because it's like learning, you can learn something today and it clicks 4 months later, right? So that's multi-year, and the other thing is the government can actually mandate collaboration within the project and say, we are offering a multi-year, but at the same time, there has to be some form of collaboration.
There's some plans of maybe we would actually have that as a requirement for the submission or applications to be collaborations across.
Thank you.
Did we answer the question that I just wanted to make sure that we answered? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that multi-year, the collaboration of those pieces also rebalance power. When we are talking to each other, when we're collaborating and working together, it's just power from the funder back to the community as well, because especially if you're willing and able to walk away from funding, right? I think sometimes we forget within the sector that we actually do hold a lot of power. And if we talk to each other, we can make the decisions as to who's going to apply for certain pieces of funding, what are the organizations that are coming together, or if we say this doesn't work for us, we're not applying. There aren't, if the people doing the work aren't willing to do the work in this way, the work's not going to get done. These things aren't just going to happen. I maybe wanted to shift gears a bit unless people had a question in the room. No, is that okay? They're going in 2 ways. So Rochelle, you mentioned looking inward within the organization. So I'm curious about what that has looked like in your work. You don't have to say where you feel necessarily your organizations are at on their journey, but what has that experience been looking inward as an organization to then be able to do this word outward?
Yeah, as like in my bio, I left the city of Edmonton actually to take the job I had. And the city of Edmonton, like I think a lot of organizations have a lot of work to do, but you know, as a pension job, I had a good salary and I got every other Friday off. So I was like great over there. When I looked at what Tamarack was doing as an organization, so when George Floyd was murdered, one thing that they did is they didn't rush to go do a response. They instead released a statement a few months later saying, we've been quiet, but we've been anything but silent. And what they were doing was talking about what's our response going to be, how are we perpetuating racism, oppression within the organization? What can we be doing? What are consultants that we can bring in to help lead us through this work? So that's one thing that I appreciated about their response, was that it was very inward focused before they're going and being performative with that work. Right now, actually today, we have a RFP that's closing for equity, diversity, inclusion, justice, and reconciliation audit. And that is to look at our policies, to ask to interview our board members or staff, as well as learners of our member community and our learning community, to see what is it that we're doing that we can improve upon. What are we doing well, but where are those areas of improvement? And how do we put those recommendations and what we're uncovering into action? And not only how do we put that into action, but how do we communicate that journey? So I don't want an action plan for EDIJR work that is sitting in an internal system. Like I want that to live out in community so that community holds us accountable to that. And I think that doing that internal assessment of, we want to be anti-racist, but what is it that we do have to look at before we progress?
Yeah, thank you.
I don't have a direct job. I probably do my main job, which is also my side job. I sit on the equity audit. It was originally equity audit committee, now it is equity action plan. And what we did, we first did the audit for the organization, talked to all the employees, or most of them, those who responded, and found out where things were not going good, as well as looked at the policies themselves. And, you know, some of them we read through and we are like, Lord Jesus, how did we get here? Right? But so that's some of the work. It's still ongoing and it's a lot of work. Just for those who plan to do it, it's years of work, but it's very, very important. And getting all parties, all stakeholders involved in the process, and not just you know, just the people in there, but also the recipients of the services.
So for End Poverty Edmonton, so I am the only one with an anti-racism focus within the organization. And I know there's many other organizations where you have just one person who is meant to be the anti-racism lead. And so it's making sure that there's conversation with everyone within the organization to understand that anti-racism is not a person, like it's a lens. So me being at a table does not mean the table is anti-racist, right? Like it's a lens that we need to be aware of, we need to educate ourselves on, we need to have self-reflective questions about every single initiative or activity that we're doing to make sure that it is anti-racist. So that's the conversation that we're having right now at End Poverty Edmonton. We're trying to create an anti-oppressive framework for all the other game changer leads to be able to do that work of self-reflection on their own. And then with me supporting whenever necessary. But my wish is that there would be a space where people who have the portfolio of anti-racism or EDI in Edmonton, where they can come together to share different frameworks that they've created within their organization, because I think I've spoken to almost everyone on this panel about that framework, developing a framework that you can share with other people that's easy to use, people who are interested in making their initiatives or activities anti-racist. So if we had a space in Edmonton, like a community of practice, where people who are doing this work within their organizations can come together, share ideas on how they're moving the conversations within their organization, I think it will be very beneficial. So I feel like part of that is my responsibility to make sure that that comes to fruition. But yeah, just having someone, a staff person who has anti-racism in their title does not mean the organization is anti-racist. But I think many of the organizations recognize that. And so anti-racist work is continuous, continuing learning, and auditing and seeing what needs to be done differently. So it's ongoing work that we're doing at EPE, and it's just getting started. So,
Do you want to add anything?
Yeah. So I'm always coming from the funding lens. Sorry about that.
No, that's good.
Like I said in my intro, we did take intentional steps in 2017. And I think that was after the End Poverty report that was released in the city, where there were some factors that were contributing to poverty. So as a funder, we knew we couldn't do everything. So we picked one, which was anti-racism. And we asked ourselves, being funders in this space, how do we serve better? And the question that came back to us was that we needed to look more inwards at how we grant, especially our discretionary dollars. And then the audit happened. It was 360 degree, where not just internal audits that was carried out, but also external grantees were surveyed. And then the feedback gotten, and we reviewed it. And there was also a recommendation to revisit the audit annually to see how we might have moved the needle, if the needle moved, or if the needle moved forward or backward, as the case may be. And so we have been doing this after the first audit in 2017, 2018, we carried out another one in 2020 and carried out another one in 2021. Now, what we're hoping to do is to view our work with an equity lens, so that we don't have one person responsible for always being the fly on the wall or drawing people's attention or staff attention to misses or issues that might be in our blind side. But we wanted everyone. We're a small team of about 27 people now. So we wanted everyone to come to work with an equity lens, viewing whatever they were doing with an equity lens, whether they're in donor services, whether they're in the grants department, or whether in the finance or communications. and I see it's happening. Sometimes when we're in meetings and we're talking, the advocate or the anti-racism advocate or the DEI advocate is not me, it's someone else, but speaking up, and the person is an ally, and I just sit down and I'm amazed. I feel gratitude. I feel that the little work we're doing, it's been impactful, but then it's a long journey. We are just starting, and I see it's like running a race, but not a sprint, a marathon, where I run as the director of equity strategy, but I'm also given that space to step back, rest, because it's exhausting, and someone else is running the race for me, waiting at the other end to hand the baton to me. So that's how I internalize the work.
Can I build off the lens?
I'm ornamental here. Yes, please go.
So at Tamarack Way, we released a lens for looking at our programs. So that those questions of like, who's being excluded, like how are we using our power and privilege? And I'm really proud because it's people like Neka was saying that they're not experts in anti-racism, but they're doing everything they can to educate themselves and like impart this knowledge across the organization. But I'd love when we move beyond the topic of having this lens. And the way I say that is because like glasses, you can take them on and off when it's convenient for you. But how do we actually embed anti-racism into our work? And then the other thing I wanted to build off was the community of practice. So like what Essay's working on is really quite beautiful and necessary because that's how we stop competing. That's how we start understanding, not reinventing the wheel and starting from zero all the time. And we've also, Essay and I have been talking about a community of practice for racialized leaders working in anti-racism through Tamarack, like a national lens. And I think that the role of like community organizations is to understand the importance of those spaces and to allow staff time to spend in community within their internal workspaces, to feel supported, to have that safe space where you can vent and talk about what's going on, but also co-create solutions. So as someone that's like, you know, getting started within my career, people have done it before. They've gone through these challenges and these barriers. And I need those like, those aunties, those mothers that can help you like, you know, like cool it, Rochelle. Why don't you look at this strategy for how you can like move this forward or talk to this person? So I think that organizations really need to look at how they support racialized workers, even within the nonprofit sphere. Nonprofits are quite diverse, but the leadership is quite white. So how are we shifting that balance? And we're starting to see it. But how do we keep like adding that, or we're sitting at those tables and we have the power and we can redistribute that power back in the community.
I agree with Michelle. I would just talk more about the community of practice. As had mentioned, she did mention it to me again.
I'm a convener, right?
Already doing that work already, and I'm really grateful that someone is thinking about this. So sometimes we just think about it, but we don't put it to action. So she started putting it to action. Having a community of practice will be the best way to build capacity amongst ourselves as well. And the truth is that we don't know it all. When I come from the DEI or anti-racism, I look at factors or issues with an intersectional lens. My lived experience is going to be different from Essay's, it's going to be different from every person in this space. But when we come together as a community of practice, we share this, and there's power in storytelling. I don't need to leave it to know what the issues are, but I can learn from a second person's experience. So that's a great idea, and I would really give it a huge thumbs up. And when it finally comes to fruition, please don't leave me out of the fold. I'll be happy to be part of it.
I just wanted to quickly add to something you said about exhaustion. Like the exhaustion is real, like it's very real for people who are doing anti-racism work and also have lived experience. And so having that space where you can just be yourself, to vent, is very important. And to have allies, I don't think people recognize how important that is too as well. Like when you don't have to do the speaking and someone else is speaking about the issue, someone else without the lived experience is speaking about the issue, that matters a lot. So whenever we see something like, you know, anti-Black racism, We don't have to say, okay, that's Africa Center. We don't, like, why are we there? Or anti-Asian hate, like, we don't, or if there was like a hate crime in the mosque, like, we're not Muslims. So hopefully, like, that narrative, that people are shifting their way of looking at things to see, like, this is all of our issue. It's not just the people who are closely impacted that should do the work. Sorry, you had a question and she started talking.
No worries, there are 2 more questions from the online participants. So the first one comes from Ubuntu. They're saying, I would like to see more funding allocated to smaller communities instead of being concentrated heavily in the larger city areas. Central Alberta tends to be forgotten in most spaces for funding for racialized groups. Can larger organizations make space at the table for smaller organizations, especially from rural areas? So if you would like to.
And this is where the power of collaboration comes in. Because when you recognize your shortcoming, which might be, we are not being seen, I'm not being seen, you gotta stand on us too, whether you like it or not. Like, sadly, like I said at the beginning, nonprofits are not started, they're not businesses. It's not like someone goes in with money and starts this big business. So when they apply, there is something called even getting a letter of support. Like, use those opportunities. If you have a great idea and there's another organization, say Center for Race, Africa Center, or a different one, reach out to them, get a letter of support from them, get known by them, because that adds some weight. Does it, Bandas? Yes, it does add some weight. But if you put in your application and it's just like your, lovely little application, it might not be enough. So that's the collaboration, that's the reach out. Right?
So sometimes funding or support doesn't look like dollars or cents. I'm sure some of those communities have funders in that space. The world is changing. The way philanthropy and the way funding projects and sectors and nonprofit is changing. They shouldn't feel shy to just go knock on the door and say, I want to have a conversation with someone to share some ideas that I have about my project. I'm a small nonprofit. We are run from my basement. It's just me. I do it at my free time because I have a full-time job, but I need direction. I always say, small grassroots groups and nonprofits shouldn't be afraid to ask that question. Most of the time, it might not necessarily be a no. It might be okay, you don't have, or your project is not well written. We know a group that can guide you, and then they refer you to the group. When you go there, you build up your grant writing or application skills, and then you're able to put in an application, and then even if it's a $1,000 or $2,000, you take it in, use it for your project, but you build that relationship. You have knocked on that door and it's been open. Once the door is open, please don't back down. The funder can give you a letter of comfort, and you can take it and get other funding and start from somewhere. That's just like having a foundation. I know the hardest part is finding that space to knock on the door. But philanthropy is changing, funding is changing, the space is changing. There's so much happening. Information is everywhere. It's just asking. So it might not necessarily be going to Africa Center to partner, but sending an email to say, I have this project, who should I be talking to? Someone will respond to you to say, oh, you could reach out to this organization, you could reach out to that, but getting pointers and asking for the right direction. Like my people, there's an African proverb that says, he who asks directions never get lost. So ask and then the answer will come.
Yeah, don't act alone is the big one.
Yeah.
Like, don't act alone.
I think that there's more of a role though, because when you look at where funding money is concentrated, it's often concentrated in urban centers. Even Eastern Canada gets more money for anti-Black racism projects than we do out here in Western Canada. So then think about what's left for rural Alberta. And so when like Africa Center, Center for Race and Culture, when you're getting funding to enact programs, how are you distributing that so that it's not just concentrated in these larger centers? But how are you finding those community animators, those community leaders, those people with an idea in their basement and supporting their idea? So it's not just them knowing who the funders are, but also what's the role of the funder and government in order to understand like, where's your research and your homework to see who those people are and how you can support them as well? Because they might think, wow, Africa Center, large organization, largest Pan-African organization in Western Canada. What are they gonna, like, no one's gonna wanna take a meeting with me, right? Like, they might be scared to just reach out. So what's the engagement that's happening that's reciprocal?
Thank you so much.
I just wanted to add to that. I think there's a role for organizations like Africa Center. We have to also do more to get to those communities. So when you look at a fund, like say, for example, the supporting Black Canadian, SPCCI, Canadian initiatives, a lot of the organizations, you're right, well, urban organizations, very few who are in rural communities and indeed wonder why. So there's a role, there's an opportunity for us to actually make that effort to go to these communities and find out. What I did find out, but I need to do more, is that they just be clear about this. They don't have these opportunities. So it's how, so they're almost kind of on the network. You know, so they don't hear about these opportunities, but we need to do more to get to them. So that is our next. Yeah.
So, I think there's a question out there. I think there's a question online. And we want to take some time also to have a bit of discussion because we want this to be like our own capacity building, like what are we actually going to do when we leave here as a next step? So maybe we can do 1, 2 questions, take a quick food and drink break, and then we'll go into small groups to have a bit of a discussion before we close off with questions and answers. Maybe we'll take the question in the room.
Yes, it's firstly the comment and the question. So when we talk about mining, by the way, my name is Adebayo, Chris Atiki. My pronouns are he, him, they, them. I'm a Black frontman, and the founder of an organization. And now we speak at the experiences of Black fans and Black LGBTQ refugees and newcomers in Canada. When we talk about funding, what came in mind is that we have funders who don't fund transgender people. We have funders who clearly can't put money in spaces like our spaces. Or at often the time we are being monitored, right, from time to time. Or people are really worried of the outcomes of what we can really bring on the table, or they are not used to community like our communities, which sometimes tend to be a gap that I mean, many of our communities struggle with foster syndrome. Like they really have that fear that even if we are funded, we are expected to run our organizations at the rate of growing organizations, or white-led organizations that have existed or have worked for like a decade or 20 years. They've been, but we are expected to produce or write reports. Deliver in the same way these organizations have delivered. Perhaps we want to deliver our reports in video, right? Maybe that is how accessible that can be. Perhaps we want to, maybe just do storytelling or have testimonials that the funds use, this is what, happening. I mean, when it comes to the policy, how policies are really being made, even how funders write these grant applications, they are not accessible for organizations like ours that really don't have the 10 years or 20 years of experience of writing grants that funders have made very complicated. that you sit on the branch and you can't even finish it in the middle, you're breaking down. You get what I'm saying? But if we have like accessible, simple, like ask something simple, let us write from, not complicated, branch, you spend like two days on a branch writing, right? And you can't even complete it. And on top of that, they require so much. You need to have this, you need to have this, you need to have like a 2 years, 3 years financial statement. Why do you need a 3 years financial statement when I can provide a last year's financial statement that shows how the organization has been running? I mean, that is a query, and also our Black organizations or Black-led organizations still have internalized transphobia and homophobia. Or people travel from back home, from where we come from in Africa, with their racism and their hate, and bring it into these countries, right? And it is a taboo, and actually they are in huge positions, right? So it is a challenge for us, the Black LGBTQ community, to actually think we're even welcome in spaces of our Black community, because when we go back home, like, we are not like treated, I mean, people think we're evil. People think we don't belong in our like own spaces. So there is that hate on hate or racism on racism. I don't know how to put it, but maybe you might have a term to it, but it's really a challenge, and that is the gap that is in between our communities that really need to be, perhaps we need to bridge the gap or build tables for our communities or wait for them to heal and then bring them to tables like where they are kind of, I have a complaint, I can share something. Yeah, so how do we really bridge that gap, and teach our community? Because people come from their head, from our communities back home, but then we face the racism you face. I face it. I'm a place of work, walking on the streets or whatever. But on top of that, there is that intersection of phobia that is built within that. I come in space as a trans. I can't put it in a box. I can't put it in a box and leave it at home and come as, as someone holy or they want. No, I'm gonna come with my lived experience, my hunger, my pain, or what the community has put on me or my community. I can't leave it away. But that's sometimes that kind of sabotage relationships that maybe I might be speaking a little bit ahead, like loud with all of it, bring my hunger, bring everything in space. And some people can't hold space for that. But if you can't hold space for that, how am I even gonna be in that space? Which means, I mean, perhaps you can address this in any way. How can we create those sustainable healing communities, funding healing spaces and joyful spaces, giving space for our communities to heal more, right? While actually feeding us and funding us and giving us space to grow and learn all that other people have learned that we have no clue. How do we really do that and bridging that gap? Yeah.
I think that we're in this transition point when it comes to LGBTQ+ issues. I think that even within like Black communities, just looking at it not from the intersectional lens, we have to learn how to work within a system that was meant to exclude us. And I think that when you look at the intersections of race, it's how do we work within the system that we're trying to transform? Maybe we're trying to break it, maybe we're trying to not exist within the specific system as well. So sometimes it takes navigating how you write that grant report. I think you missed part of the conversation where we're talking about collaboration, but it's like, yeah, there is transphobia, there is homophobia within the Black community, and it's something that we as a community need to look at and address. But who are those organizations or those people that are allies to the community that have the resources or the support or the influence that can actually support what you're doing? Because what you're doing is beautiful and it's really necessary here in Edmonton. Do you have any, Nneka?
Yeah, coming from the funding, because I wrote down some of his points, so I think I will talk on the funding part. And when I speak on funding, I speak on behalf of my organization, That's the Edmonton Community Foundation. We did take note about where our funds are going into. A couple of years ago, when the unfunded report came out to give a picture about the charitable sector funding in Canada, we decided we had actually started to look at where our grants had gone to in retrospective, in ways to guide where our funding will go to in future. We have identified gaps. We're working in those gaps. For the LGBTQ communities, a community we support, we find ways, creative ways to support them. We understand the intersectionality of their lived experience in Edmonton, and we hope to always keep doing that. On the funding part, you had mentioned flexibility in funding. That we know that is an issue with a lot of nonprofits here. And so we asked ourselves, how do we reduce these barriers? It seems unfair, or it is not even seems, it is unfair to ask any group at all to spend 2 days writing in a request for maybe $5,000. That's not right, that's not fair. And then talk less of a group that most probably will be run by volunteers, an organization that will be run by volunteers, and also communities that have English as a second language. So we decided to ask ourselves, what other creative ways can we leverage on the initiatives that we know have worked in different sectors or in different provinces and replicate it here. My sister Rochelle had mentioned trust-based philanthropy. So before trust-based philanthropy became named trust-based philanthropy, or call that, we had kind of dabbled a bit into it at Lycia, granting multi-year grants, and also having verbal grant applications and verbal reporting. So verbal is where we get an email or a phone call to say, hey, I have a grant I want to request for, but I'm not sure where to start. And then I schedule a meeting, we have a conversation. Then it was during the pandemic that we started the grant stream. So it was a virtual meeting. And then right now it could be in person. And then while we're meeting, we're taking notes at our end. So the burden is on us to capture what you say and approve it internally and grant you just by that meeting. And then after a year, we'll reach out to you again to say, hey, what was the learning? So it's not a written report, but if you have it, we will take it. But then we actually do, me personally, I enjoy storytelling, and I get more a rich report when I engage with the grant recipients, where they share their stories, and those you can never get if it's a written report. I see how the grantees' eyes light up and they are animated and they talk passionately about their project and their learnings from it and what they did well and what they hope to do better, and errors or learnings and everything I get back, it's more enriched when it's in form of stories. And based on that experience, we're looking at ways to map it into a lot of our discretionary dollars, funding that we give out to the community, because we've seen that storytelling it's actually, when I say it's rich with ethnocultural communities. So.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments and your question. And I think one piece that I do, maybe we can talk about in the small groups as well, is a piece about healing, right? There aren't a lot of funders funding spaces maybe, or maybe they're not as common for spaces for healing. And that's such an important part of doing this work. So I hope we can expand to talk about that a little bit more, but maybe if we take the question online, and then maybe one person can answer the question that comes online, whoever is involved, and then we can take a quick break.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a longer question. I'll try to summarize it. It comes from Fontia. Nice to see you here. So the question is, how can we come up with mutually beneficial models that can encourage grassroots organizations to align their mission, strengthen their initiative, pool resources, and put their best foot forward when they present their asks to funders? And sort of a follow-up with that is that, do we have any player in the industry that has the wherewithal to dedicate itself to the specific work of convening and building that sort of collaboration or collaborative models, basically, for these organizations?
We're currently working on that. I think. It's still in the thought process. We've started knocking on some doors to say, this is what we plan to do. We see the gaps in the community and we want to get funders in the city and also community builders in the city to come to a space to say, what are the complex issues? How do we collaboratively solve them? But this time we want to hear from the community as well. So we're gonna have community leaders and thought leaders in the same space as funders. And that collaborative desk is where we see innovation being able to happen. And it's still in a thought phase, concept phase. We're still putting pen to paper, but once it happens, definitely we will let everyone know.
Thank you.
Okay, so maybe let's not call it a break because I feel we might get carried away. We're going to split up in two parts of this room and then breaking out online as well. So maybe if we just grab some beverages, some food, and then as we come back, we'll organize ourselves. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's great. I'm also sharing the questions on this screen, also online, for the questions we would want to continue with. If we want to just think about it, maybe chat a little bit as you were taking a little break, and then we'll come back. Maybe 10 minutes. 5 minutes. 5 minutes. We'll be back in 1 minute. Yeah. The refreshments are in the back. Yes.
Oh, was that right? That was the, I walk over. I looked at it.
Amazing back here. Please come and grab that.
You know what I was thinking of?
We're going together and do those. Oh, no, no. start, pass off to Mentor to start the conversation.
Yes, absolutely. So, I also shared the questions, with everyone that is joining us online, in the break. And please feel free to share, your comments in the chat. I will make sure to, share them with everyone here so we can have a conversation that way. So I would like to ask both, who are present here and also the ones that are joining us online, to share their ideas. So maybe we can start, with the first question that we have here. How has your experience working with the community organizations to engage the public been like? So whether you would like to talk about organizations you work with and how that sort of engagement practice has been, or as an individual working with a community organization, what challenges and barriers exist in our community from your experience? And I think we were talking about a few of those right before the break. And so this is just an open invitation for everyone to share their ideas with the panelists as we can have a conversation.
Is that still being recorded?
Yes, it will be.
I'm just curious.
Yeah, it will be, but then as the end product, we can always. But. So, yeah. Oh,
I don't work with any organizations, but I did go to the anti-block racism city event workshop a week ago. I thought that was pretty progressive. I guess I was a bit confused as to why they had, because this way for them. And there's so many people in the city that can kind of represent the story that happened. And I've listened for a very, very long time. They asked a lot of great questions. I think it was very supportive, and they were writing down a lot of notes. So I got this feeling when I left that something's going to happen, and you just kind of have to wait and see.
yeah. Thanks so much for sharing. Thank you. And yeah, it's.
I work with my name is Basil Bohan. I'm from Art and Public Ladies. I work with some organizations in writing grant applications. What can I see office is coming together as I said before, coming together as the whole team to a ground. We see that groups from one country living together, standing in like 10 applications. Now when I see them, you know that they can come together as one in bigger thing. So having this small applications. They say that among ourselves or themselves, they don't come to an agreement, having that one unity, and we that the community together. But I think that's pretty much the message. They have their ideas, but don't agree to come together, we probably have more and dreams. I'm like, is this what's missing here? So that's I'm like, what's missing here? Because it's there. There.
Yeah. Thanks so much for sharing. And at any point, of course, our panelists, if you would like to speak to an issue that is raised, feel free to do so. Any other comments regarding the first question that you would like to share with us? And I think we may have they can, so I can see the participants cannot access the chat. I apologize for that. So you can just share your comments in Q&A. Please feel free to do so here, and we will make sure to share that with everybody.
Yes, so my name is Nadine, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm from Seabird Elderly Advocacy Center. And I come from a place where I really want to advocate for the families and how these can impact different communities in very different ways. And so we are trying to work on our anti-racism journey. And of course, it's going to take a while. And I think one of the things that I'm struggling with is making sure that everybody part of the team is on board. So rather than it being performative, people are actually embodying the practice and using it in their day-to-day work. So instead of it being a checkbox, that like, oh yeah, we have a diversity committee. It's like, are we fully believing in what we're doing?
I know, a few weeks ago, I worked with our HR manager and we looked at our job template, and it's actually like a responsibility is to understand your responsibilities under the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action. One of your responsibilities is to embody and center EDI-JR work within your day-to-day function. Qualification, which we listed, was experience working with diverse communities. So not necessarily saying that you need to be from a diverse community, but you have that experience in talking to people who are different than yourselves. What else did we do internally? We also have action teams. So we have 5 of them, which are like measuring impact, programmatic, internal policy work, individual learning, and board and external communications. And so all staff are invited to sit and self-select which committee they want to be on. And so that's a way that even if you are in a role that is internally focused, that you can get involved and learn and join the organization on that learning journey and that transformation. So hopefully this will help.
And also, if I can just add to that, like doing like an equity audit for the organization, like having someone come in externally, like a consultant who can come in and do that audit, like have like in-depth conversations with people to understand their level of awareness and what the issues are within the organization. So that is another way to see, like, you know, are people actually just saying that they're doing this, or are they interested in doing their work?
I think the external piece is really important because especially if you have like one person who's leading the work, they're busy with their day-to-day. And so you're just prolonging getting that end product of what you need to be working on, what that framework looks like. And also the staff are going to be more comfortable talking to someone outside of the organization than someone embedded within.
I just had a really quick question for you, Rochelle. My name is Joe E.M. from the Heritage Council, but a couple times you've used, I'm familiar with EDI, but I think you said EDI-JR, was it?
Yeah, so the equity, diversity, inclusion, justice, and reconciliation.
Thank you.
My name is Ali. I'm from the organization called Horn of the Catholic Education Science Organization Horizon. Basically, meaningful. We usually focus on, you know, what we call the supplement for newcomers, and also the newcomers. Most of the people who faces of challenges, what they call the different contesting makes, you know, the matter of challenges in the past 1 year to solve that problem. In terms of, you know, communication barriers, in terms of, you know, getting employment is, you know, how they can just put themselves to continue their education back home from home. When you go to universities, they say you just feel, you know, going back like that other education back from home has no value. But we are just sending so many questions. Go back, you know, fill this form, send this form back to your previous organization, back Africa, fill this, which almost, you know, takes around 1 year to go on back. So we always try to get more awareness past how we can just adapt, you know, this as a life. And most of the communication with awareness, you know, basically about the diversity and inclusion, you know, strength and identity, autism, you know, impact, challenge, you know, impact of diversity in values, you know, all of that things, you know, we always try to deal with them, despite of, you know, challenging or discussion or funding. Every time you can just go to the grant places, you can say, we are formally, you know, open grants, you know, part of proposals, you apply, you have matched the proposals, April, May, but finally, you know, it's very, you know, very good that you get results and impact from them. It's good that we are now partnered with African Media Center. We have also partnered with we are supporting like a Korean state program. But also, we also deal with this, whenever you come back and say we are seeing, getting, discrimination from employment agencies. Firstly, we are the last hire when it comes, the job reduction, we are the first, get laid off, whatever. All the work we go, just who you know, not what you know. In terms of networking, in terms of whatever. So all of them, we try to always speak, how we can adapt this, highlight, because of everybody when come here, that's more expectation. And then when it comes to the realities, we also try, to make also in the last 1 year, we have been trying to understand more about how we can also cope, the problems. Is just discrimination, even like advocacy, practice, for the majority people, if it's awareness, discrimination, and its impact, also environment, monitoring, and important sometimes the cases at the level. Possibility was one of the major issues, despite of these, challenges. So the only thing is, is there any, like institutions who can just give support, building the capacity for the, organizations, how they can come up with strong proposals or, grant management. And so on.
So, thank you so much for your point and sharing this with us. We get to hear a lot about capacity building gaps in our local nonprofits here. But if you mind me asking, what capacity building gaps are you seeing? Would it be governance issues or operational issues or both?
Actually, mainly is about the way of fundraising. We try fundraising.
Okay.
Also we try to not money dollars for donors, just try to have, an aspect of administrative policies, knowing about the donor compliance, whatever. But
So we do have local groups that are doing this work here in Edmonton. One of them is the ECBO. They are being funded by the city and the province and also by ECF to do this work. So if you like, I can connect you with them and you can take it from there. And I'll also give you my contact. You could follow up with me just in case no one responds, and then we'll find ways to support.
that's great.
Hi, my name is Yuki. I use her pronouns. I'm from the Sexual Assault Center at Edmonton. One of my main roles at SACE is, EDI related work. And I guess once I've been there only for around 5 months, and in that short time, I've been able to notice where our gaps are in our services, and what our gaps are as an organization in general. And although I do think our organization does a lot of, we work really hard and definitely are on the path of, working towards becoming an anti-racist organization. And that is, one of our goals. But with EDI work, I feel like it often feels like we're not, at least from my perspective, I feel like I'm not able to kind of get anywhere. I feel like I'm not having outcomes. I've acknowledged these gaps. I've talked to my coworkers who are also acknowledging that these gaps exist within our organization, within the system, within the communities and stuff like that. But it just feels like, what can organizations do to like operationalize those gaps that we're seeing? What can we do to kind of bridge that? I guess that's kind of my question. I know it's really vague.
It's not big.
I just feel like EDI work just feels so,
General.
yeah, and just in circles a lot of the time.
I think one thing that doesn't answer your question, but I think it's the Sexual Assault Center of Edmonton, SAFE.
Yeah.
They have the social justice deck, and there's a lot of questions just about race, just about like our history with Indigenous people. And I think that what they did was they took a look at, you can't talk about sexual assault without looking at oppression first. So I would look at that because I just think it's a cool resource that they developed. but you need an executive sponsor. So whether that's like the leader of your department, or if there's like a dean or someone within the school, that is going to provide the funding and the resources to hold people accountable to not only taking what you've identified as problems, but now who's responsible, not only from like, this is within your job responsibility to get this done, but what are the dollars behind it to push that forward? And how are you going to be measured upon that? Because like at the U of A, I'm sure people are measured on some type of performance plan. So if you're not getting EDI related tasks on your performance plans, then like, why would people do it when they're so busy and it's just a side of the desk activity?
Yeah, and sometimes like change doesn't happen. Like it's it's sometimes slow. So like give yourself that grace to understand that, you know, change is happening, but it might not be visible right away. Yeah, that would be my recommendation. But like I hear you for sure in terms of like that frustration, but having like what Rochelle said, having someone at the executive level sponsoring, and also don't I find myself sometimes like overthinking and like planning to get it done. Sometimes like we just need to go ahead and do, right? Like if it's like we need to change our governance structure, just go ahead and like convene people together, come up with an idea and do it. And let's give ourselves that grace of like, okay, if it's not working, that's okay. We failed, at least we tried, right? But like, let's go ahead and do. Like the culture of overthinking, over planning is kind of like what we're all used to with the systems that have been created. But with EDI work, like if we have the educational knowledge, the live experience, good intent, then let's just go ahead and do it and see what happens.
There is a comment from Leonard from HTC, and they're saying that finding the right volunteers is a very big challenge for volunteerism. The first and foremost challenge is to find volunteers who are willing to devote their time and expertise to help children in need. We need to streamline our process for screening, training, and matching volunteers to students and families. And the other challenge that they are identifying is that they have with Home Tuition Canada is managing the expectations of students, parents, and volunteers. And they're saying since they're providing free services, some students and parents have unrealistic expectations or may not take the program seriously, which can lead to disappointment and frustration from volunteers. So again, going back to limitation with funding and just perhaps, you know, not having the most corresponding sort of expectation from people who are engaging with them.
I think that I run social enterprises that are volunteer driven, and volunteers is always really difficult. For me, because my work centers within the Black community, I reach out to Black Students Association when I need like a quick, immediate volunteer. The power of like social media also really helps me find volunteers. It's sometimes just communicating what that need is. I know that the universities have like volunteer programs that help students build up their skills, or look at what your volunteer need is and rebranding it into like a practicum or internship. But you just have to have that ability to actually provide value back to that student, because they need someone that can actually supervise them and tell them like, this is great, this needs improvement. And also just like recognize what they've done at the end of the term and have a well thought out project so that there's that feeling of accomplishment. So, yeah.
Yeah, I had my hand up, but I think I'm being.
I saw a couple back there, yeah.
First I wanted to think about the questions that were there before. My comment was just offering training, like in our organization, we have youth and refugees and Black LGBTQ who really want to live, who really seek these positions, but then we have perhaps limited resources or to offer the training for them to really, you know, be the support for them to take on those leadership positions. And then having folks with lived experience on the table. Like if you sit around your table and you're like, hey, there is no Black woman on this table. Why am I still sitting on this table, right? And I'm talking about race. There is no Black queer woman, or there is no trans person on this table. I think I have to bring a table and create that and invite them on this table to bring their experience and knowledge, hence creating that inclusive and perhaps getting more ideas from other folks with lived experience, and then perhaps funders walking away from the usual norm, what they use to know at, since we are really growing rapid, there is state law, there is all these means that ask funders to, allow room to adjust or space for other people to bring in I don't know how I can call it, but walking away from the norm, if the norm, I would say the norm is, if the norm is now pronoun, like you have to say pronoun, that's kind of the norm. Maybe create space for people to say, I don't use pronouns, address me by my usual name. And the other thing is policy, like a fund that is putting, these grants out there, ask for a policy from the organization. What are the anti-Black racism policies do you have in the organization? Bring them forward. What are the policies you have about inclusion and diversity? We need to see them before we give you money. Then you'll be recording those specific organizations accountable, which means you're funding an organization that has these policies in place, that at the end of the day, you're not just giving money out there. Whether we have so many organizations who are so performative, right? Put rainbow flags on the door, but when inside they're really full of discrimination, maybe really also following up, but that was like the suggestion that I had.
Did you also have one?
Yeah, I think sorry, my name is Gloria Riva from Riva now. Ali has mentioned some of the issues that I wanted to raise. I wanted to talk about limited resources, because working with newcomers and refugees in the LGBT community is a challenge for them, because in that waiting period when they put in like their application for asylum, they have no jobs. They do not know even where to go and access the resources. So sometimes it becomes very difficult even for them to even be able to pay rent for themselves. So if we have like funders who can support that kind of immediate, then it would really help, because we experience that every single time. Yeah.
I'm not sure if do you require status, like the participants to have like permanent residency status or citizenship status to be able to access the services that are?
So we don't roll out services, but we fund organizations that carry out those services.
What is the requirements of the organization?
So yes, charitable services, but we found creative ways to fund non-registered charity. But that I don't think we don't drill down to that level to ask who are the final beneficiaries, and it's intentional because we need to also, we understand that as funders there's a power imbalance, right? And so we don't go down to that level. But just to buttress to what he said, yes, we do ask for information around the equitable practices. So we do ask questions about if the organizations have DEI policies, what they are, and if they could share with us if they want to, but a yes will suffice. And we try to hold our grantees accountable for their DEI practices.
So I guess it's left to us within like the voluntary or like nonprofit sector to also come up with services or requests for funding that will be able to support people who have
who are like seeking asylum, for example, because a lot of organizations that are focused on like, let's say, federal funding or provincial funding, they're like wanting to support service users that have status, that are citizens or permanent residents. So like, it's up to us to also remember that we have asylum seekers who might also require exactly the same service. So that's on us as service providers.
Yeah, maybe I'll say that we're hoping to continue this conversation. Oh, another?
I said, but it's okay.
No, that's okay. No, I was just trying to be mindful of time. Maybe.
Okay, maybe I'll be quick. So we've talked a lot about collaboration today, and I just really love to hear folks' thoughts about like how that really gets started. Is it just about creating like a big meeting? Like, what does that really look like? Or is there work to be done in inter-community work that has to be done beforehand? One of the things that we, like last year when there was a tragedy that happened in Chinatown, there was a lot of conversations about how to address these things. But one of the things that I noticed as a community member was that the conversation that we were having about that area, which deeply impacts Indigenous folks and other brown and Black bodies that have been, marginalized and in a way that they're unhoused in an area, we're not including any of those conversations. And it was really challenging because the foundation of building some of these relationships, even with nonprofits that service these communities, were not done ahead of time. So now we're in a space where we have this agitated event and everyone's talking about, oh, what should we do? And we're talking about, increased police presence, like whatever those things that impacts these communities deeply, but they're not at the table because we don't have those relationships. And so that piece of collaboration is so important, but I wonder, how do we get that started? Is it just like, let's just have a big space, invite everyone to come? Sometimes there are community members that feel hesitant to be in some of those spaces because those relationships haven't been built in the past. So yeah, I'm just wondering, just kind of throwing it out there for everyone, what that looks like.
I think it starts with identifying what the problems are. And then finding people that work in that space to bring them together. So most probably in this scenario, we might not be talking about just one table. There could be several across the city, each created to solve a particular issue, a particular complex issue. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
I also, like, just from a community organizer perspective, I can think of about 3 people who run like larger events in the city who I went on my lunch break to like help put tents up for their festival, for instance. They organized an influencer tour for the dining week I just did. And so sometimes collaboration isn't talking about this like large scale collaboration. Sometimes collaboration is picking up the phone and asking for help, or I organized and I actually paid for people to go for a brunch this summer that were doing all similar work. And I was like, we need to exchange numbers and talk and just like be in community together. So sometimes you have to form those like grassroots levels of collaboration and community so that when something large does happen, that relationship and connection is already formed.
Based on your example, I was thinking even of where the event happened in relation to what your organization is. So if this is my organization and it's based here, you kind of need that sense of who else is in this space, right? And then also thinking of, and I think everyone should have a thought of having kind of a spider web visual, very visual, of this is what my organization is. Who else could I tag team? So I may be able to tag team with this one to solve this issue, like you said, and then tag team with this one to solve this other issue. So just being aware that which is where we go wrong, because, and that's why our organizations can't grow. They will always stay small. If you think about it as just that, you need to think of who else can I pull in and how much impact can we have together.
I like that. Who else is not on this table? We're here, but I'm sure there are voices that are not represented. So who is not here? And when you ask that question, it actually makes you reflect more inwardly, and then the ideas start coming up. And I've been at tables where I didn't know anyone, and I agree with you. It's harder to come with your authentic self when you feel you're not amongst friends or people you know, or people you can trust. I always love using that word trust, because especially in this anti-racism space, it's a very risky role to play. But that said, when you find yourself in such spaces, just go there with an open mind to engage, to learn, and also to share what you have, because definitely you bring value to the table. And then you would find people gravitate towards you. And then it starts that relationship.
And that's part of what we do at End Poverty Edmonton is convening. So if you have like an idea or there's a problem that you say, you know, we want to bring people together to tackle this issue, can you support us? Like that's what we do at End Poverty. So we have an inclusive economic team that can support that conversation with Chinatown revitalization. So that's what we do. And I know like we're not out there enough, but the resources are there. We have staff who can help support convening and bringing people together for those types of conversations.
Yeah, I was eating earlier and I had a conversation about training too. Usually on Eventbrite, there are free trainings that are there to help with capacity building and things like that. So organizations should check out those spaces and find those trainings that are there and send them to your leadership, your community leadership to do those trainings, because, you know, they're available.
Yeah, and I think we've talked a lot about collaboration and how important it is for spaces to connect and collaborate. And we have another comment, I'm just going to summarize it here, but Millicent, their organization is Mesh of Mothers Foundation, and they're collaborating with individuals, particularly Black women and mothers. And what they're saying is, again, one of the barriers is the lack of that hub. Where, you know, they can, for instance, see all the funding opportunities that exist as a new organization, right? Or being able to connect with other community organizations for guidance. So just the importance of holding space again, when it comes to funders and larger organizations to make sure that they're supportive of their attempts as well. I know that we are running over time.
I think but the beauty of it is we're hoping to have a series of conversations over the next few months anyway. So we'll keep you posted on those and hopefully hold them in this type of format as well and hybrid. So there'll be lots of opportunity. We don't want this to be just a one roundtable and done. It'll be ongoing and connected to the stuff that came up today.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but I want to thank everyone for coming today. This has been really nice, especially in this cold Edmonton. Sandra and Africa Center, thank you so much for your collaboration and the amazing food. I did not expect that. And we'll wrap it up, I think.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, we would really appreciate this. And for our online participants, we are a bit new in this hybrid. So if there were issues with this, we apologize, and we try to make it better with every event that we will have as hybrid to give everyone a chance to connect.
And one last thing, thank you to everyone in the room and these wonderful humans over here.
Absolutely. Have a good evening as well.
Thank you. Put your jacket on. Here's some apology.